I was thinking about this today while driving and with my son, and he ended up somehow getting water on his shirt. And so as we're driving on Hunt Club, he made the decision with the help of my wife to roll down the window so that he can dry his shirt. And I was driving and I could see what seemed to be a police officer on the other lane, and I'm thinking this is not going to end well. And so as only a good dad can do, start yelling and started, gaslighting. Who does this? Stop doing this. There's a cop over there. Act like normal people. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking to myself, I'm actually not angry at my son. The entire tirade has nothing to do with my son, has everything to do with me. It's what you consider to be secondary anger. We sometimes have unresolved emotions and issues that we're trying to work through. And because we don't know how to resolve that emotion, we often take it out on the ones that we feel are the easiest target. How many of you have done that? Never. Sometimes it's John in LifeLab or diagnostic. It's a little promo for the diagnostic, whatever it's called. To diagnose whether or not you need LifeLab. There's a question that he asks people, which is about exaggerated reaction. Where in your life do you have exaggerated reactions? Those areas usually are a sign that you need healing. So it's really simple to see where you're at. We go to the what do you call it there? The garage, which I'm not often there. But we go there because they look at our car to see where this vehicle is at from a health standpoint. So they do a diagnostic. They check it out and they say, hey, you've oiled this, that, and we resolve that. But when it comes to us as people, we don't really know what to do. When we're born, our parents are not given this training manual, this manual that comes with our vehicles that tells us exactly how to operate. And so often we're left to try to figure out ourselves. And often most of us are born into situations and circumstances that are incredibly challenging. And so what I want to talk to you guys today is breaking free from the cycle, renewing our minds and embracing really what I believe to be the freedom that God offers us. But here's the thing. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about a pattern I think many of us find ourselves in. And I've discovered this in my own walk. It's a cycle of habitual thinking that keeps me living in the same experience over and over again. Let me ask you this question. How often have you found yourself in the same situation and thinking to yourself, how did I get in this circumstance? And you're frustrated. You're dealing with the exact same frustrations that you were dealing with a year ago or 3 years ago. It's the same setbacks, the same struggles. You just feel like you're running in the same stupid treadmill over and over again. I would say that's probably about 99% of humans. Most of us are dealing with the same patterns, and often these patterns were hardwired into our little brains when we were young. And generally, they come through an event. I had an event in my life when I was 8 years old. My grandmother died. My parents had already fled the country because of the war. And when my grandmother died, and I wasn't there, nor was I there when my dad left, nor was I there when my mother left. And so for me, my grandmother's death, it was an event. Both my sisters were there too. They experienced the same event, but our interpretation of the events were completely different. My interpretation of the event is everybody leaves me behind. I'm not wanted. I'm not loved. And that became the perspective of my life and the way that I viewed life. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I used to think I was weak. What was wrong with me? How come my two sisters didn't behave the way I behaved? How come they weren't as angry towards mom and dad? And I came to recognize that trauma impacts us all differently. Some people can experience acute trauma, i.e., go to war and come back still intact. And another individual can have a car accident and have PTSD for the rest of their lives. And we often, as a society, we look at those people and we go, that's a weak person and that's a strong person. But that's not how life works. We're all impacted because it's the meaning that we give to those events. And all day, every day, all we're doing is giving meaning to events. And I've been thinking about that. So what was the meaning that I was giving to the event today as we're running, from Hunt Club here? The meaning that I was giving to this little tiny event was that somehow I was going to be late. Because when I was a soccer player, I had this very crazy Serbian soccer coach, and he used to impose this rule. And the rule was that if you weren't early, you were late. It was hardwired into my brain. And because the one time that I did show up, a couple of minutes late, I ended up running for the entire practice, nonstop. He didn't even talk to me. So the meaning that I gave to that event was this: being late means punishment. We don't know this conversation that's happening. This is all at a subconscious level. And this is the challenge of transformation. We always tell people, oh, it's so simple, it's so easy. No, it's not that simple. When things have been hardwired into your brain, it's like little railroads that have been, established, and the same train has been running over and over those tracks. And you're supposed to just, make that little left turn. It's very difficult. I believe the reason we get stuck often lies in the beliefs we hold, the meaning we give to those events, especially those formed before the age of 7, when we were really vulnerable, when we're open to really observing everything around us. Maybe for you guys, someone told you you're not good enough. I've had so many conversations with so many people where we've had an experience where somebody said to them they weren't good enough. And that became the lens that they saw their lives through, or you'll never succeed. You see, those little events eventually become beliefs, and beliefs essentially shape our entire world view. When you think, I suck, I'm not capable, I'm going to be left behind, I'm not lovable, well, those beliefs turn into our thoughts. And those thoughts turn into our emotions, and those emotions turn into our actions, and those actions turn into our results, creating this really crazy loop. Because when you look at your result, it reinforces your belief. So you go, oh, look, I suck. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I've lived that cycle for many years of my life, not understanding what was going on underneath it all. And it's very difficult for you to have grace towards yourself, because you think if you just work hard enough, if you try hard enough, you can get out of this cycle. But I believe this belief that's dictating a lot of our thoughts and creating our emotions. Imagine when you're in a state of, generally when you've experienced trauma, you're in a state of what they call this parasympathetic, which is like you just want to run. Like sympathetic, my wife is helping me because I am, after all, I learned my English with a bunch of Koreans. Did I ever tell you that story? When we first came out, this is just too good because it's getting way too serious. But when we immigrated to Brockville, I recall we had to, obviously I didn't know any English, and so I went to ESL, and it was a bunch of Koreans that just recently arrived. And here I am, this little kid, and I'm learning English with a bunch of Koreans. And so I wasn't getting it, because I was probably learning more Korean than I was, So if I get certain words wrong, it's because of that event. It's how I tie it all together. I got an excuse for all my actions. It's not my fault. I'm just a victim. I just want to tell you, I know it's not your fault, but you're also not a victim. That's the point of this sermon. So here's the thing. Beliefs shape our reality. Your belief, whatever you're going through right now, is really powerful. They shape what you see in the world and in turn how we experience it. The Bible says this really interesting in Proverbs 23:7. It says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. The way you think is the way you are. So thinking is really important. If we believe we're not worthy, not capable, not unlovable, then that becomes a reality. We only see the obstacles. And our brain, sadly enough, it's just a machine. So whatever you feed it, it's like, oh, okay, this is what we're going through. So you're training your brain literally, and you don't realize it. And so then you're like, hey, brain, what's wrong? Why you're not doing what well, you've just trained it with the beliefs. It's just hardwired. The brain just will do whatever you tell it to do, essentially, because it wants to bring into an end result. That's all it is. It's your brain is just trying to bring an end result, good or bad, it don't care. Isn't that crazy? So in some respects, we can say that our brains are working against us. It's not a bad thing. It is. Our brain often is doing the exact opposite of what we want. Because if it didn't, then you wouldn't pick up that cigarette. Knowing fully well, someone told me that's outside, and they're like, I like it. I love it. Why do you like it or love it? Because your brain is telling you it's great. We love it. So it's hard. It's a hard job to try to change yourself. We cannot actually change ourselves, but we often think we can. So the truth is this. The beliefs, this is the good thing. This is the good news now. We're getting to the good news. Your beliefs are not written in stone. It's not good. They're simply the meaning we gave to the events. And those meanings can be changed. This is the beauty of the gospel. The gospel message is simply that. It's the ability to see our circumstances or situation through Christ. The events change completely. When we see Jesus on the cross, the meaning for most people, especially for the disciples in that moment, was what? This was useless. What was the point of it all? They were blind to what was happening. There was an event, and there's events happening in our lives. The problem is that we're not seeing them through the lens of faith. When we see our circumstances through the lens of faith, we start to see something beautiful happen, that often God does his best work through our crisis, our messes, our illnesses, the things that we deem to be horrible, the things we're ashamed of. That's when God does his best work. God does his best work when your detractors are looking at you. God does his best work when you're thinking that this mountain is impossible. The problem lies in this, is that we're looking at our lives through our five senses, our perspective. When we see life to our perspective, it's limited. We only see what we see. But when we see it through God's lenses, it just changes everything. The experience itself is not what's shaping your life. It's the meaning that you've given to that event. You've assigned a certain amount. This is why for so long I was so afraid of dogs. Didn't matter if it was a tiny little puppy. Didn't matter if it was a massive greyhound. They're all the same to me. They're all going to bite me, because I had an experience in my life, and the meaning I gave to those experiences was that all dogs are bad. I want to tell you a story. It's not my story. It's the story of a young man named Joseph in the Bible. You guys want to do a quick reading? It's a fun read. I love it. This is my favorite story. So we're going to read this really quickly, and then I'm just going to extract some stuff because let's just look at Joseph's story. Jacob, we'll start 37:1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man, is 17. So he's 17 years old, young kid, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zippah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Oh, gosh. Because he had been born to him of his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. You know, the technicolor, Joseph, the nice robe. He was like, looking cool. When his brothers saw that his father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Jealousy. Joseph had a dream. I love that. Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Sorry, where did I go here? Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So we're just setting the scene here. Joseph is the youngest son of Jacob. He was born of old age, in his old age, and Jacob loved him more than all his other 11 brothers, and the 11 brothers hated him. He has this crazy dream, and this dream he doesn't fully comprehend nor understand. And then he goes to his brothers and tells them, hey guys, I had this dream. And they're thinking, what? You're going to rule over us and reign over us? They already don't like him. And so what's happening here, and this is the first, what I want to extract from this is that often there's an event that invites us into a journey with God. Joseph's event is really simple. It's that he has a supernatural experience. He has a visitation at night, a dream from God, and an assignment for his purpose in life. He doesn't fully know exactly what it is. And it happens in the midst of his 11 brothers, his detractors, the very people that are already jealous. They're already jealous at him. They don't like him. And he's not wise enough. He's young. So he goes and tells his enemies, hey, by the way, I had this amazing dream. Want to hear about it? Then he had another dream and he told it to his brothers. So now, second time, listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Oh my God, it's getting worse. Imagine they're just seething. They're just like, oh man. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? You know, he's a dreamer. He's probably thinking, you're crazy. It's like my son coming to me and saying, hey, Daddy, you know what? I'm going to be the president of the United States of America. I'm like, okay, son. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? So his father's like, are you insane? None of us are going to bow down to you. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Even though he's just like in the back of his mind, he's like, maybe not. He kind of liked them. So he just kept it in the back of his mind. So here's where the story gets really, changes. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to them, go and see it see all is well with your brothers and with their flocks, and bring back to me. Then he sent him off to the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, A man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They've moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. So you see what's happening? You will have an event in your life, and sometimes that event is supernatural, comes from God, or it could be an event that's come to you through an obstacle. For some of you, it might be that you were born into a family that didn't treat you well. Maybe there was addiction in the family. Maybe for some of you, you were born in a war-torn country. I don't know what the circumstance, but there's an event that happens. And that often that event does signify something. But for us, I have a dream. How many of you have a dream? When I was a little kid, I always had a dream. Every kid has a dream. But what happens is that we don't recognize how that dream is going to come to pass. And for Joseph, the dream that God gave to him, not only was it birthed in front of his detractors, it had to be tested and refined. And so what happens to him is that the very brothers, imagine your own brothers, they plot to kill him. And if you read on further, what happens is that they actually decide not to kill him. They negotiate. Two of the young brothers decide, you know what, that's not a good idea to kill the guy. And so what they did was they threw him into a pit and pretended that, and then they went back home and told their dad, you know what, he got eaten up by animals, and here his torn, robe full of blood. And Joseph, from that day forward, went in the exact opposite direction of his dream. The exact opposite direction, because it gets worse. Not only is he left all alone, and then he's found by these guys, these Midianites, who end up selling him to an Egyptian named Potiphar. And he becomes his slave. But here's the beauty thing of the story. In the midst of the tragedy, as he's going down, his gift never leaves him. The Bible talks about this, that the gifts of God are irrevocable, meaning that the gifts that God has put into your life can never be taken away by any situation. So God can't take it away. People can't take it away. And here's Joseph. You would think that he'd be sitting down going, crap, I thought I was supposed to be this big dude, and now here I am, a slave in Potiphar's house. But that's not what happens. What happens is that he decides to be this incredible young man in the midst of his obstacles. So he takes care of Potiphar's house to the point where Potiphar it says that he did such a good job that Potiphar didn't even think about the affairs of his house. Joseph became a manager, and he started managing his house, and Potiphar was just like, dude, like, you're the best. He excelled. But you think at that moment, God would be like, hey, good job, you're promoted. No, it gets worse, because Potiphar's house wife kind of likes him. She wants to sleep with him. He's a young man of integrity. Imagine in the midst of it, he's like, no. And she sets him up. And she says that he attacked her. So Potiphar puts him in jail. Now he's in not just normal everyday jail, he's in a dungeon. He's forgotten. Imagine how far he is from that dream now. That 17-year-old kid, he's experiencing some hardships along the way, and now he's at the worst place you could ever be. He's in a dungeon. Yet his gift, he just can't help himself. And so he gets so good that the warden of the prison says, you know what? You become the guy. So he's taking care of the whole prison now. He's managing the prison. And in the prison, there's this guy who's the cupbearer of the king, and he's been in prison for some reason. He's Pharaoh's cupbearer. And he has a dream. And Joseph interprets his dream. And he says to him, but do one thing for me, he says to him. Don't forget me when you get out. There's another guy, he's a baker, he has another dream. He gives him an accurate translation of his dream. But he's forgotten. For 2 years, the cupbearer forgets him. How many of you guys have felt totally and utterly forgotten by God? You're doing the right things, yet nothing seems to change. What is your belief in that moment? What would be the meaning of that event? Some of you, like I'm not a Joseph, I'm so sorry, but if I was in that situation, I'd be cussing God out. I'd be a bit like Job. I'd be angry. What did I deserve? I did nothing wrong, and here I am in this situation. But Joseph doesn't do that. The Bible talks about this thing about Joseph is that he was a blessed young man no matter where he was. The story of Joseph illustrates this truth. God will give you a dream, sometimes a vision of greatness, and the dream will always seem impossible to fulfill. And you will be betrayed, and you'll be sold into slavery. And eventually, you may even be wrongfully imprisoned. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is, will you continue to hold on to the dream? That's the difference with Joseph. He held on to that dream. He would not let go of that dream. No matter what was going on, no matter what was people done to him, he kept holding on to the dream. He did not allow the circumstances to dictate the meaning of his life. He chose to believe in God's promises. That's the difference between us and Joseph. My question to you right now is, I know some of you are going through it, but are you holding on to the dream? Or have you given up? You see, Joseph's journey was one of disruption, restriction, but ultimately transformation. The entire time that Joseph seemed like he was going downhill, this is how the kingdom works. The kingdom is an upside down concept. When you think you're going down, you're actually going up because God is setting you up. What God does is he puts circumstances in our lives so that he can refine our character, so that he can prepare us. I heard this preacher said, the bigger the call, the lower you gotta go. Look at Jesus' call. Jesus was called to be the savior of this world, and his path was not just an ordinary level of suffering. He went to the depths because that's where he had to go in order to take those skis away from the devil. He went to the pit of hell because that was his assignment. His assignment was great. So here's the thing. Your interpretation of what you're going through, my interpretation right now is, I'm like, every time an obstacle comes, consider it pure joy, my brethren, for the testing of your faith, for this is endurance, and endurance, perseverance. Oh my goodness, God is setting me up. He's preparing me. And people around me are like, are you insane? This is not, because it's not how God works. The world works the opposite way. It's all about pleasure seeking. It's all about comfort. Tell me one thing that is a worth in your life that hasn't come through some pain. My 3 beautiful babies, I was at their birth. I didn't experience much. Well, I experienced some pain where my wife was like literally holding on to me and going, "You can do it, baby. I'm going to die." But the pain that my wife went through to bring those children into the world is unimaginable. I'm sure many of you women can attest to it. But the beauty of it was life. I know right now some of you are going through a disruption in your circumstances, in your life, and you might even feel be restricted. You're like, oh, I can't move. But here's the thing. God's love is always about disciplining us and preparing us. God's love will constrain you and will make you uncomfortable at times because it has an assignment for you. And the ultimate goal is transformation. Joseph's old life and his way of viewing the world had to be completely shattered. Everything he knew loved was taken away, but God was at work, even in the darkest moments. God was breaking old patterns in Joseph that we don't know about, his old beliefs, and he was preparing Joseph for something greater. He was practicing in prison. He was giving dream interpretations. He was refining his skill because ultimately one day he would be called on to bring into fruition the dream that God had given to him. And it wouldn't be just an ordinary man, it would be Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the known world at the time. It literally he did go from the pit to the palace. When Joseph was released from prison and elevated to leadership in Egypt, he was ready. The trials he endured were part of God's refining process, shaping him into the man who could save nations. So here's the question. How do you break out of this cycle of continually giving this negative meaning to the events of your life? How do you change what you believe? Here's the thing. You got to first recognize that our thoughts, how we think, does determine our state, our disposition, how we show up every day. So here's a weapon. Every morning, wake up and tell your brain that, no, you're not running me this morning. I'm going to be run by my spirit. So you begin to fill yourself with God's truth and what God says about you. That's the challenge every day, because you're going to go outside and there's going to be a lot of your environment, your circumstances. You can't change those things, but you surely can change your thoughts. And you can surely, because when you change the way you're thinking about your circumstances, your emotional state changes. You become powerful. You no longer are a victim to whatever you're going through all of a sudden. You're now the person that's dictating to your situation. I really believe there's only two states that we can exist in. We're either in love, which I believe is a powerful state, or we're in fear. We're never we're never in the middle of it. You're either like paralyzed by fear, anxiety, worry, all that stuff, or you're in a state of love where you're just like, oh my gosh, God is so good. He's so amazing. We're being essentially, when we sit with God, James says something really profound. He says that there is no fear in love. And then he says the only reason you're afraid is because you've not been perfected in love. What is John talking about? He's talking about this idea of receiving God's love. That when we're perfected in his love, it dispels everything else. It says it casts out fear. You get delivered. So what is the antidote to the problems that we all are confronted with? Jesus Christ. It's simply that. It's to say to him, God, you know what? It's not up to me. I can't bring this dream to fruition. I can't do anything. I didn't bring myself into this world. So what makes me think that I can run this life on my own? Instead of living our lives in this, fight or flight, fearful, stressed out, anxious, what would it look like if we just simply sat down and received his love no matter where we're at? I've been having some amazing conversations with my friend James. James has been one of my biggest teachers in this season because James has taught me something profound. He's taught me that in the midst of unbearable depression that I can't even comprehend nor understand, he's known God's presence in ways that are so profound. Nothing in his circumstance has changed, but he's allowed the depression to fuel him toward a deeper and intimate relationship with Christ. Here's the thing, guys. Some of you feel in prison just like Joseph right now, and it's easy to fall into despair and fear. Because the message that we're hearing from our illness is this: it's never going to change. Your addiction, you're always going to be addicted. But here's the truth. The truth is that God says that nothing in this life is permanent. The only thing that is permanent are his promises. Everything else in this world is temporary. The suffering that you and I will experience is temporary. Every time I'm in a situation, I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. I feel stress and anxiety. Most of my fears have never come to pass. They're all imagined. So here's my antidote to you guys today. I'm going to give you just one thing. Romans 12:2 tells us this: do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's so much in this world today, the personal development world. It focuses on self-awareness. No one needs to tell me my problems. I don't need somebody to tell me that I got issues. I live with my issues all day, every day. I don't need anybody to remind me of my problems. And this is the personal development world today. People identifying their emotions, understanding their identity. But here's the thing, being aware is not enough. Otherwise, we would have some of the healthiest people in the world today because we're all aware of our problems. We see it. The situation is that how is it that we change? By renewing our minds. You must replace the lies you believe with the truths of God's word. My new thing to do right now is simple. I'm just spending as much time as I can in the word. I'm just reading the word and I'm letting the word renew my mind. I'm letting it wash my mind with his truths. And I know it sounds trite and simple, but it's the simple things that are the most profound things. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. He is the life, the source of true abundance, peace, and purpose. When we surrender to him, we're no longer surviving, but we're thriving. We begin to live from a place of power, knowing we are loved and that God is with us. Conclusion, hear this. The kingdom of God is not over there. It's not even in this beautiful place. It's inside of you. And all you got to do is mine it. And the more you spend with God, the more you'll be transformed to the point where you will not even recognize yourself. And I know lots of people here who have testimonies of God just totally and utterly and completely transforming them. No man can change you. No protocol can change you. The book, the 12 steps won't change you. These are all just bridges. They're just bridges. They're a means for us to ultimately connect with God. And so, God, I pray today that you would renew our minds no matter what events that we've experienced, that we know that your truth will always upend the lies that we've experienced in our lives. And so I pray for this amazing place. I pray for every person that's come today to know that Jesus, his presence is sufficient. I pray this in your name. Amen.